Welcome to the archive. In today's discourse episode, Connor and I have an absolute blast discussing
everything. All of it.
A variety of topics.
A wide array of topics.
We talk about metaphysics, morality, good and evil, revolutions in light of current events today, globalization, corporations,
demons,
angels, money, all the things, as we wrap it all around the question of revolution, whether or not there even is a revolution to be held, and whether or not it would be possible for us to actually attain betterment in the world as we reach outwards via integral philosophy towards the light at the end of the tunnel, and what that actually looks like and how can we get there. So with that, we hope that you really enjoy this episode. Thanks again. So on this channel, we talk a lot about reading books and reading well because it's part of Mortimer Adler's entire How to Read a Book that we do the review of, and we talk about self-teaching and self-learning and what that looks like. And one thing that I think I personally tend to neglect is reading history texts. Personally, history was like the most boring topic in school for me. I always thought so too. Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so dry.
Well, I just never understood why we learned it. You know what I mean? I used to actually ask my mom, like, okay, I get the point of science and math, but why history? And it never dawned on me that you would read it because it would give you a guide on what not to do and how to, propagate in the future.
Right. It's like you only repeat history if you don't know it.
Exactly.
That old cliche.
Right.
So it's funny that you felt like that as a kid, because I hear you all the time espouse the idea that, narrative is this cultural tool that we can use to sort of gain insight into the practical application of what it means to be a human being. And although you can tell someone all day, don't do this, don't do that, or this is bad, that's morally unjust, you always say, no, you need a story behind it.
You need a story where you can't just say stealing is bad. You need a story where someone gets their hands cut off for stealing to really drive it home.
And I think the best history books are written in that way. Not like straight up fiction novels, but truly that is what a history textbook is to some degree. It's someone telling a story of an event that has occurred.
Right.
But oftentimes they're so dry because all that these historians are trying to do is just give you the facts of the matter in such a black and white way. This is what happened. Oh, that is what happened. It's almost like when we read books for that narrative entertainment, we hate that. Right? Your mom being an author, she always says, don't do that. Right.
Show, not tell.
Right. Show, not tell. Right. Show, not tell. It's like the biggest thing in writing fiction well.
Right. It's like it's one thing to say he was stressed, but it's another thing to say he was jittery and he was biting his fingers and
like giving those adjectives, those juicy experiences, which really put us in the moment and let us embody that individual and try to understand their point of view.
Exactly.
And we relate to it through our own sort of like cognitive functioning as we build this picture in our imaginations.
Exactly.
History lacks that often, I think.
Which is weird because a lot of people find history to be like the most invigorating thing in the world. Like my dad, for example, shout out to my dad. He loves watching like the old documentaries on history about Normandy Beach and all that stuff. Like he gets a thrill from it. And so it's interesting to see how like some people are just drawn to that, even though you're kind of defining it as like this dry, superfluous type thing.
Yeah, for me, that was just the way that it was. I mean, I have to work to read history.
Sure.
And I bring up Mortimer Adler again just because in his book, How to Read a Book, he gives techniques for how to study all things, if it's science or a math book or a philosophy book or a history book. And it definitely did help me. And I just wanted to reiterate that on the channel because why not, right?
Right.
We're all taking part in the great conversation here and just bringing it back up. But my biggest issue is how history, again, was written so dry and how it was taught. Another aspect of one thing that I never really got or understood or really liked was how apt to fantasy and hyperbole some historians can be in the past. It's I guess what I'm trying to say is it's that old cliche that nobody knows where the saying came from. Maybe it was like Winston Churchill or someone else of history is written by the victors.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing I thought when I was a kid is like, oh, yeah. Human beings were just so nice to have gotten together and write out what had happened objectively, no distortions or anything like that. But it wasn't until later where I realized history, and the word history is kind of funny because it's kind of like his story.
Right.
The story is distorted by the author and their own biases and stuff. And it's also pretty likely, you could say, that they probably went out of their way to either eradicate the history of the loser or to alter it greatly.
Right, yeah. So there's two things there that you bring up. that I think about often. It's called his story, right? A huge part of this postmodern movement is people wanting to topple the patriarchy, sick of the values that we live under, sick of living in this weird uniform society.
Right.
And it's almost as if they're angry that it's his story, right?
Yeah.
It's all this linguistic game about like gender identity and power plays, and very Michel Foucault-esque.
All woman to that.
Yeah, very feminist.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
His story.
Yeah.
What about her story?
Right.
Why has God a man?
It's like a gender neutral term. I
Yeah,
think, but
yeah.
whatever.
Like, can we call it like person story?
Person story. That's really progressive.
Their
DJ.
story? Their story.
Their
Oh,
story? I like their story.
You really need to learn your their story.
Yeah. What about them, though?
Themstory?
Them story.
That just
You're
sounds-
forgetting all about them.
That almost sounds like Sesame Street to me.
Yeah.
Like rhyme. Themstory. Dumpster
It
heap.
sounds like a place almost, but
Yeah,
that you
maybe there
wouldn't
is.
want to go, but that's
Don't-
okay.
You don't want to go to Themstory,
Yeah.
bro. They got guns there. And knives and syphilis.
Right.
But yeah, and so that's the one thing, right? It's very dominator-esque, patriarchal. It's written by the victors, which are man, right? Old white men is what the whole movement is against.
Right.
And so it's funny that we call it history because it has been written by those victorious men.
Well, that's another problem too. Is that thank God we live in a time, right, where you don't have to be a white man to have your ideas prosper in the world.
Right.
It just so happened to be that way back then, for nefarious purposes, we could
Right.
say, for malevolent reasons.
Or
but
maybe
that-
it was just the natural order of things as they emerged for whatever purpose.
Exactly, but that doesn't mean that everything that they said, the entire content of their what they espoused, was inherently negative.
Oh, right. No, definitely not. And yeah, I don't want to make overgeneralizations
Yeah.
and say all the history in the past was all written by men at
Right.
all. But it's funny to me. It's like, it just brings this idea up that makes me laugh, right?
Right.
It's this characteristic nature of the cliche of history being written by victors. And then the second thing is, you said when it is, though, when the cliche actually is real and what's actually being said is happening in reality. A good example of that would be the Gnostics. So Gnosticism, I want to talk about on this channel. A lot of people know about the Gnostics in the world if they follow any sort of occult or esoteric ancient wisdom
Right.
cultures, such as alchemy or Hermeticism. The Gnostics were sort of a branch off shoot of Christianity.
Yep.
And
They were like Christian monks.
Sort
kind
of.
Yeah.
It was like a byproduct of Christianity in the era of the Romanization of everything, where, what Christianity was, not to get too deep into that whole rabbit hole, it was just this amalgamation of multiple cultures and people trying to unify their
Yep.
ideas, and the Roman Empire trying to hold everything down without completely subverting and destroying everyone.
Right.
Just like, let's just synthesize everyone's worldviews together and we'll call it good.
Yeah.
And now there's this new covenant and whatever.
Codification and whatnot.
Yeah, this crazy stuff happening. Not to get too far into Themstory lessons about Christianity right now. The Gnostics, the reason why I bring them up is because all throughout history, for the most part, up until we found like the Nag Hammadi scriptures and the Dead Sea Scrolls and a couple of other texts, we only knew about these people and their ideas from fragmented scriptures and like writings from the church.
Right,
And
because
from
they weren't putting up billboards. They really actually tried to.
they went
cover that.
underground.
Yeah.
The church literally ousted and killed them.
Right.
Everybody wants to talk about like the Crusades as being this awful thing, or the Inquisition, this awful thing that the church did across Themstory.
Right.
But history, it's like I don't even want to say it anymore. But really, we only know about them because of the shittiness that people were talking about them.
Right.
Like their enemies, like the popes and men of the church, who were just like, oh, those guys over there, they're demons. These are what they think. These are what they believe. We hate them. They're scum of the earth. And all of the shit talking is really all that we had of those people. But it did keep their ideas alive in just enough of a
Right.
bastardized way to carry us forward into history, to keep the conversation alive ever so slightly.
Right. At least to get us to the information age where the true essence of what they espouse could come to light.
Where we could find some things.
Right.
Yeah, truly. We actually found like the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now it's like, okay, these are some of the legitimate actual Ethiopian texts. These are some of the real ideas that they espouse. These are some of their mythologies and their philosophy.
Right.
Where before it's kind of, we only knew about them through history from the victors who hated them. But if the victors never even spoke about them, if they just wanted to crush them into oblivion and never say anything ever again, we would have lost that history.
Right.
So it's just a weird, funny quirk of the way history is written, the story of it all, whether or not it's written colorfully or dry or who writes it, somehow, hopefully at least, we continue it on, right? We continue that conversation. And that's something I'm really big about, and I know you are as well, together on this channel, and I'm going to reiterate it all the time. So thank you, audience, for listening and joining us in
the great conversation.
Continuing the great conversation. And then the last thing that I want to say is history is also not always written by the victors legitimately,
right?
Not in some weird, fun thought way that we're kind of playing around with right now. A good example, and I'll just read off right here. I have some examples. Right after the Civil War, the Federalists. What?
Nothing. I was just thinking. It's kind of like, like when your friend comes back after his first time getting laid. He's like, yeah, it was awesome, and there's nothing bad happened. I didn't get nervous. It's like that's kind of like the victor's interpretation of history. It's always going to be this hyperbolic, over dramatized. Everything was all good. We were the good guys.
Yeah, we were good. They were bad.
Yeah.
No, they were the terrorists, which I want to talk about a little bit later for sure on this episode. But yeah, it's always this romanticization, right?
Right.
But what's funny, you don't hear about it as often. This is why the cliche, I frown upon it. History is not always written by the victors. It's written by the losers as well. And the example would be the Confederates right after the Civil War ended. You would call them losers, right? They lost the war to the North. Them Yankees. Take me out of the ballgame, bro. But a couple examples is in 1866, General Daniel Harvey Hill wrote some stuff that truly was just utterly glorifying the Confederacy. And even though, they lost and they were awful. In 1884 to 1887, there was a popular magazine that was published called Century Magazine, in which a battles and leaders of the Civil War was written, which included lengthy articles from both United States and Confederate military leaders about the war. But former Confederate political leaders like Jefferson Davis and Alexander Stephens also wrote autobiographies and histories of the Confederacy that reflected their version of the events. And many history textbooks in schools throughout that century even espoused the romanticization of the Confederacy, even though they literally lost.
Right.
And even films like A Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind and other media sort of was erected that, again, it affected the literal textbooks that they were teaching these children in school. Although history went down one way, sort of hyper-politicized icons and their writings were powerful enough to sway the public, especially in the Confederate-led states, where even though they lost, they were still at heart rebels.
Right.
I remember growing up in Georgia, and there was a kid, his name was Zachary, in my elementary school class in 4th grade. He wore Dickies, and he would chew in class, and he brought alcohol to school literally in the 4th grade. He was this crazy kid, and he was definitely raised in sort of a very racist household. The things that he would say, how he would act, he would always be I'm a rebel, and he brought the Confederate flag to school in school because we lived in the Deep South, right?
Did you ever check on him? Is he?
I haven't talked to that guy since elementary school.
Okay. Hopefully he's doing okay.
But but it's just in areas in which they lost, they still espouse those topics, right?
Sure.
So even though history went down one way, the losers still had a huge effect on those areas. And I think it also played a part in why it's so systemic still, racism and those things, is just because history is not always written by the victors.
Right.
And that's the only thing that I wanted to get across. Because my point being on this long tangent is that media itself has power, right? And the proliferation of said media has even more power than any one person. The outlets that people go to credible media sources or otherwise has always kept alive those ideas, right? Whether or not they're good, bad, right, wrong, history, it can be skewed, but it's all out there because the media, the pages, the TV series, the books, the magazines, whatever, is continuing and promulgating and perpetuating those stories. Today, we have the advent of the internet and the information age. So now more than ever is it a cliche and an incorrect one to assume that history is always written by the victors.
Right.
There is this power play struggle.
Yeah.
And we talk about this often on the channel, is now anybody and their mom can go online and like give their 2 cents on anything, espouse their opinions, make a post quickly.
Yeah.
We're both susceptible to doing things in an emotional fervor in which we may or may not say things that aren't actually true and we didn't fact check ourselves. And now we have this slew of words happening and this giant conversation that we always talk about on this channel.
Yeah, well, I think information was, before the internet, was filtered through a media conglomerate that was kind of fragmented into maybe different media conglomerates, but ultimately they had the call of what we did and didn't get exposed to. And now you can go on a forum online and hear someone's perspective that you've never heard before, and you can disregard it, scoff it off, or you can integrate it into what you believe.
In the past, there was always that power struggle play, right? With the and there is today still, like with Facebook banning people, or Twitter banning the he who shall not be named. Well, he who shall not be named at least rightly called his show what this whole game is. Sure.
It's an information war, info wars. I mean, that's the game we're in right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, exactly. And really just understanding that the internet brings this whole new ball game to how we do history and just like how we talk about it and how we have that conversation. It's just important to have that self-education, to have that discipline, to know where the sources are that are credible and where they're not. Because things are so crazy in the world and nobody knows what's true, sometimes I really don't feel like we can even know what's true anymore. To digress just for a moment, just to segue for half a second, I know I do this a lot. Please bear with me. Lately, I've been making Facebook posts and talking on social media and forums online like Reddit a lot about Jean Baudrillard, one of the famous postmodernists, and his concept of simulacra and simulation, which is a book that he talks about media and the way that we interface with reality and symbols and language and how we look at the world, ultimately to give the point that we don't know what's real and what's not anymore.
Right.
Literally because we've almost confused our symbols for reality.
We're in Plato's cave to a certain degree.
100%.
There is that which is being projected on us that we really have no control over. It's bestowed upon us by institutions who take it upon themselves to bestow it upon us.
That, as well as literally the language and the tools that we use to just be human beings, we've gotten so lost in the world that we've created around us.
It's systemic. But maybe not intentionally, but it is.
Yeah, it's like systemic. When you go to a supermarket, you walk into a Walmart and you look left, right, up, and down. No matter what direction you're looking at human artifice.
Yes.
You look at human packaging, human marketing, plastics, clothes, steel, building, light, electricity, flooring. Yeah. Images, iconography, like propaganda,
logos,
candy, food, video games, entertainment, stuff that we need for a house, everything. It's all a reflection and a shadow of mankind. And our reality is like that as well. We've almost become gods of our environment to a level, right? We're not being attacked by predators anymore. We don't have to really try that hard.
The food chain, yeah.
Yep. So we've dominated everything and controlled everything in very uniform ways such that we can have more leisure time to just like watch Netflix, or I don't have to build my house because I can pay someone else to do it, so on and so forth. We live in a concrete jungle.
Yes.
It's still a jungle, right? Because there are these archetypes that still exist in the world. There's still anger and hatred. There's still like domination and freedom and tyranny and like sovereignty.
Right, but they're manageable. They're under control. We don't have to worry about them manifesting themselves in our day-to-day lives.
Right. Well, they do. They do. It's just they may or may not be as obvious to us, which is kind of what I'm getting at.
But that's also what I'm getting at too, is I think that even though tyranny and corruption always is a prevalent force in the world, I think it's something that we kind of have to accept so long as it is under wraps, because that means that it hasn't crossed over into the realm of blatancy.
Right. But Baudrillard would say that even in the realm of blatancy, we don't know that it's blatant. Like, we have no conceptualization anymore of it being blatant because we've lost ourselves so deeply in the simulation that we've created around us. The simulation being all of the images and symbols that we use to interface.
Oh, you mean
with
like
our world.
right now?
Yeah. Well, he wrote the book in like the 60s.
Yeah.
Before the internet.
Gotcha.
But it's still so relevant today. And honestly, like, worldview shattering in some ways. And so I recommend everyone read the book. I'm flipping through it right now, but the reason why I bring it up is because, again, it's postmodern, talks about language, and whether or not we even know if we're in reality anymore. I bring all this up, plus the internet, because now, in our current state of events in the West, in America, and globally, due to COVID and other things, we are seeing these pseudo-revolutions.
Right. They're
pop
almost
up.
like small subsets of revolutions manifesting. And I do have a little caveat about that. I guess I'll preface just by saying that I understand why people do what they do, and as far as rebellion goes. I thought it was interesting that the left attacked businesses, since their gripe is kind of with income inequality, and the right kind of attacked this federal building, and their gripe is with, institutions and infringing upon their rights.
Right. Double think to the max.
That being said, I mean, I think we have to, at this point, condemn it on both sides, because especially if you look to history, things aren't bad enough now to where they warrant violence, in my opinion. That doesn't mean that we can't get to that place. I just think that right now we haven't gotten there. And also, there's another thing to be said is that the only time a revolution is justified is if the majority of the body that is the country agrees. But we're not one body right now. We're clearly separated into two entities, and that's
more. There's
more.
multiple voices happening, and nobody's on the same page anymore.
Right. It's portrayed as a dichotomy, but really it's a bunch of subsets of different voices.
Yeah. And everyone's on different pages and levels. And again, to bring it to philosophy, we talk about Jean Gebser a lot with his worldview circles and his symbol of explaining people being on different levels. And I won't go into it here. There's other videos that you can check out where we kind of dive into that deeply, but everyone is on different worldviews, like different levels of understanding the world they live in.
Right.
Where at some points in history, everyone was kind of on the same level, but now it's like, maybe when they were at the same level, they were arguing about the semantics of the thing. Like, my God is better than your God, so let's go to war over it. But everyone had this consensus that God existed and that the mythological gods were there, and everyone agreed to that. Now we've gone through so many giant events throughout history that some people are floaters all across that spectrum. We've got like the mythic, archaic, rational, post-rational, all these crazy things. And so not only are people arguing about the state of affairs in the world that we live in, but they're all literally using language and thinking about it and perceiving it through modes that are all over that spectrum.
Right.
So it makes it even harder for us to come together and unify towards something like a meaningful revolution.
Right. Well, I think that's a result or a symptom of us just being in a world predicated on logic and reasoning, which I'm not undermining logic and reasoning. I'm just saying that the pre-rational man was probably more apt to say, to not get caught up in the little details. Like, we're all children of God. We're not separate. We're all fighting for the same cause. Whereas in the realm of rationality, that's where you start to have to work out the little details, and it creates a bunch of different voices as a result.
Right. Maybe the pious ones at least, right? Because there's always humans that are just selfish and doing their own thing. But that's a whole nother discussion. I kind of actually want to have that discussion sometime soon. It's like the whole, religion being that good idea that we cling to give us our meaning, so we all kind of get on the same page. But now in the postmodern world, Nietzsche, God is dead, we've killed him.
Right. But that's just what I think the root cause of this multitude of perspectives is.
Well, yeah, it's a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's like the information is all over the place. Nobody knows what's true because there's so many opinions. There aren't like centralized institutions that we all believe in anymore. Young people are all distrusting of government for this reason and that reason.
Or media, depending on what side you find yourself on.
Right. So, and then there's this constant tug of war between big corporation, big business, small individuals who are quote unquote like waking up and having this great coming to know themselves. And as well, to bring Baudrillard back up, to wrap up that whole thing full circle, him as well as people like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, these other postmodernists, Lyotard, these people are talking about language being this limiting factor that we're lost within. We're lost within our own symbols of our own creations inside of this concrete jungle, to the degree in which we don't even know what's real and what's not anymore. So when we see something on the media or we see it in our real life, how we react and respond to both of those things is exactly the same, and we're completely lost in this weird milieu of fuckery and muck, mud, opaque nonsense. Nothing's clear to us anymore.
Right. Regardless of whether you think that it's a conspiracy put together by institutions or it's just a natural way that things have transpired, it still is what it is.
Right. And such to the degree that some might argue like Baudrillard that you wouldn't even know. You can't even know.
Right.
It's like in 1984, and I'm shouting out some 1984 spoilers right now, and we did a book review on that. We'll link it in the description, but skip ahead. I'll put the timestamp there for you so you can see when to skip to. Anyone that's listening, I'm sorry. In 1984, at the end of the book, near the end of the book, when Winston opens up and he's flipping through the journal that he found that has all of the instructions.
Which was illegal for him to own.
And he felt as if when he was reading it, he was finding like rebels, like rebellion. He was like learning how to become a rebel slowly. But little did he know that it was actually Big Brother propaganda that led to him being captured. And if I'm remembering this correctly, when he was reading the journal, it actually told him that the entire war that's happening between the three factions, the three nations on the globe of that fictional planet, are totally controlled already by Big Brother. And that the entire time that everyone was fighting and going through all the motions and standing at rallies and deleting and destroying propaganda and then recreating it, or being tortured or being subservient to the man, or whatever the whole process was, that individuals were living their lives through these motions in this totalitarian regime, the entire time it was all orchestrated and all complete illusion. This illusion of fighting, this illusion of all of this stuff, of like having scarce resources because of all of the fighting between this nation and that nation. There were plenty of resources. They were lied to, manipulated into believing that this world that they had created around them was the truth, that Big Brother controlled everything already, from the bottom to the top. And they just kept it in this state of chaos and disorder in order to continue to subjugate and manipulate people into eternity. And that is kind of what I get out of people like Baudrillard and Michel Foucault talking about power structures and in this postmodern way, and the use of language being confusing and obfuscating, because we literally are so wrapped up inside of this artifice that we've created around us that we don't even see the truth of it anymore, regardless if we're staring right at it.
I guess I just don't know if I agree that it's so grandiose of a conspiracy. Like,
May not be.
I think that certainly institutions are made up of individuals, and if you took any random group of 100 people all working towards a goal, it's not outside of the realm of possibility to think that a couple of those people would be conspiring to steer it off course or whatever.
It's not so much like conspiratorial in that there's some hyper knowledgeable cabal at the very top pulling all the strings of everything. It's just the nature of the simulation that we've created around us.
Right.
The nature of how big we've created this globalized world that we've fallen into, that we've fallen asleep to the illusion.
Well, I definitely think the invisible strings that connect all of our institutions and everything together are so complex that we really can't even approach them comprehensively or assess them accurately.
At least not normal people.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. It's almost like Alex Jones talking about interdimensional pedophile vampires. Almost.
Right. Right.
There's like, wow, that's so
out there.
That's so out there. But I bring up language again because when I see these revolutions or these pseudo-revolutions happen, oftentimes the government, the media, this big tech that we are leery of will label these things as terrorism, terrorist acts, right? And I wanted to just unpack that, because it's like, who is a terrorist and what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because language is so important, right? With these power plays.
Yes. I think that calling people of our own nation terrorists is kind of like extricating yourself from the responsibility of an internal symptom, if that makes sense. Like, clearly, if a mass shooting happens in a school, that's an internal symptom, and we all kind of need to take responsibility and figure out what is causing this pattern of events to happen. Whereas, like, to me, when I think of a terrorist, I think of like an external threat.
Sure.
Outside of the framework, coming in and disrupting the framework that we all agree on.
I think that's how a lot of people view it in the consensus.
Right. But they, but not everybody. Some people do want to say that, oh no, school shooters are terrorists, or the people who invaded the Capitol are terrorists.
Right. It's this weird language game, and this happens across the whole spectrum of how we live. It's not just with politics; it's everything. These weird language games. But the media sometimes uses the word terrorist in one context, and then sometimes in another.
Right.
The dictionary definition of terrorism says it's literally anyone who's doing violence for some political agenda.
Right.
And, in your personal opinion, you just gave it, outside entities attacking inward, not inward outward.
Right.
But so many people are calling like this an act of terrorism, right? Where I don't want to get too deep into the false equivalence of was Antifa's acts terroristic, but
one side is
aren't?
going to say one is terroristic and one is going to say the other side is terroristic.
Exactly. And that's
no
the nature
what.
of tribalism,
Right.
and the nature of polarity.
Socrates once said that the riots that I like are good and the riots that you like are bad.
Yeah, I saw a post like that sometime. Maybe it was today. Did you see that today?
I posted it.
Oh, that was your
Yeah,
post.
yep.
Very nice. I did not know he ever said that, but
It's a real quote.
But that's cool. And again, in this channel, that's why we're so against polarity and tribalism and all of this like crazy dissolution, or not dissolution, but divisiveness.
Right.
Because,
not to say that we don't have our own biases and convictions.
Just we're human beings.
Right.
I mean, I have a hierarchy of values. I say things are better than other things, but I try to integrate those opposites, right? And we hammer that like every single episode. But I bring up terrorism just because I hear people saying, oh, like Antifa was terrorists. These aren't. And then they're like, oh, these guys storming the Capitol were terrorists. They're not. But bottom line, it's like, can we ever, I guess the question I'm getting at is, can we ever have a real revolution? Because, as you said earlier, we're all on different levels, on different pages. We're not having the same conversations. We're not even on this, not even that we're not on the same page. We're not even in the same book. And we're not even using the same language to talk about the book that we're not even reading the same book of.
Right.
And so, can a real revolution actually occur? And it brings me back to Baudrillard and the simulation in 1984. Like, everyone wants to make change. Everyone wants to see a revolution. Everyone wants things to be better. But these institutions, these emergent communities and groups, these bureaucracies that are so much larger than us, with these invisible strings that you mentioned, that we have no clue how to even approach talking about or really like objectively understanding. It's almost like we're so lost in that whole process, and we're all so divided that no revolution will ever actually work.
Right.
So we're just like circle jerking ourselves into an oblivion.
Yeah, well, maybe depending on how you use the word revolution, we actually are having one right now. It's just not necessarily a bloody one. And, maybe for anybody out there who's like really fear about what's going on, it should be stated that revolutions happen all the time. I have to be a little bit morbid and say that they tend to work themselves out through means of violence, but I don't think they have to. I don't think we're at that point right now. It also should be noted, too, that like if we found a planet that was inhabitable and we wanted to bring people onto that planet, that's a revolution. It's just a revolution where no bullets are fired.
Revolutions are just like states of change.
Right.
Sure. But I think that people are, again, fed up with this uniform lifestyle, subservient to these value systems and these structures that they don't believe in, that they feel subjugate them and weigh upon the full weight and force upon them and just like keep them under wraps.
Right. A revolution in America right now that isn't a separation is a civil war, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. And again, there's so many factions and parts and pieces. It's not just like a split divide anymore. So it's quite dangerous. But again, I don't know if it could ever actually lead to anything beneficial because of all the things that we've talked about. But not to be so pessimistic, like you said, it's not a bloody revolution, right? And you mentioned earlier culture wars, information wars. I think that we, in this reality that we live in, fuel our lives based on novelty, right?
Right.
We're consumer culture. We're a trading-based society, commerce, the free market. We have evolved and changed in such a fundamentally different way with the advent of the internet, automation, robotics, computerized technology, all of these things that we've never seen before that are all interlacing everything together in this hyperdimensional patterning, that the wars aren't bloody anymore. Or if they are, it's akin to that 1984 journal, where it's just an illusion, where everything's kind of private interests. Everybody's trying to play the game in which the true wars, like in King Los's song, shout outs to the hip hop artist King Los, war, like it's a war for your soul. That's what everyone's ignoring. It's not the war with the bombs and the helicopter swarming. It's the war for your soul. That's what everyone's ignoring.
Yeah.
Because it's all about culture war. It's all about information. It's all about hackers, black and white hats. It's all about like pushing and pulling, data mining your computer for things to know more about you, to profit off of you, and also to control you, such that cultures can be shaped and manipulated and amalgamated however one sees fit. It's like Rome 2.0. I always say we live in Rome 2.0, circus and bread all day. Circus and bread. And nothing has changed. We're all hyper-stimulated, entertainment everywhere. We all addict to everything. We're conditioned to...
That's what I was going to say. I once again don't know if that's a conspiracy. I just think that human beings love circus and bread, and if they can have unlimited access to circus and bread, why wouldn't you take advantage of that access?
Right, and then so corporations emerge and people get rich and money moves around, and it's just an emergent process where we're moving forward in history towards this whatever is about to occur.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, when advertisers are selling you things, they're going at your most basic root lower chakra desires. If we're going to talk about it on sort of a Kundalini-esque Hindu scale, like your lower sacral chakra and your root chakras, they're just going to appeal to those all day.
Right.
Food, sex, women, pleasure, immediate dopaminergic.
Hedonism.
Yeah, hedonism, because it's so easy. We don't have to think about it. It feels
second
good.
nature.
Exactly. Yeah. And all of these things...
First nature, actually. Sorry, go ahead.
Versus nature? What?
No, it's actually not second nature. It's our first nature.
Right. Yeah, it's like literally we are selfish creatures first.
Right.
And then we have to use our sense of reason.
To transcend that.
The transcendent emergent properties of the mind, the higher faculties, morality, reason, language, art, culture, to become better.
Right.
So these culture wars and information wars are honestly so sinister because you can't see them. And they're so much bigger than anything. They're transcendent. And if there were a few big players in this conspiracy game, there's no faces to them.
Right.
Just like there's no face to a corporation, but we treat a corporation legally as a human being. There's no faces. You're fighting ghosts. You're trying to catch smoke.
Yeah. You know, I saw a tweet today. I don't even remember who said it, but they were saying that it's interesting that like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter aren't doing constant, trying to put out fires with PR and putting people out to do interviews. It's just strange. You don't see them. They're nowhere to be found. Yet with the way that they behave, they should be constantly trying to cover up their tactics, but they just don't.
Well, it's kind of like the way I view it, and this is why I ask, can a revolution even happen? Are we too deep in the simulation? Is Baudrillard correct? Like, it's that there's so much information out there. For one, you don't know right from wrong. You don't know left from right. You literally have no clue up from down.
Yeah.
And it's like fake news is such a thing. Mimetic transition of information, virally promulgating whether or not it's true or false, good or bad, is just confusing the whole system. And most of the time, everything, because you're punching at smoke, like you're fighting a ghost, there's not direct faces to point at when there are bad things that are occurring in the world. Plus, the educational institutions, mainstream academia, has inculcated human beings for so many decades into a very specific mode of thinking about reality in this sort of like Enlightenment era system of understanding things, which we talk about in other episodes. It has led the intellectual, the actual student of the liberal arts and scientific study, to adopt this sort of reductive viewpoint of reality, which blinds them to anything that is elusive, because we are taught and inculcated to not go outside the boundaries of that which we know for certain very often in making value judgments, which is why a lot of scientifically minded people in our friend group and online are also they're reluctant, and they're not excited to have conversations about things such as conspiracy theories or things such as potentialities for the government to be corrupt, because there's no evidence for it. And they'll say, not an accusation, but a claim without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, right? And so it's very reductive, and they don't want to have conversations at all in the realm of what if or any critical thought about potentialities that aren't immediately discernible and understandable and reducible through their language and immediate perception of their reality, because that's what's been inculcated into school, into our mainstream system. So all of these things being at play, this elusive, shadowy thing over here, whether or not it's controlled by a conglomerate of individuals or if it's just a natural process of humanity, plus the way that intellectuals tend to think about the world, plus the state of the internet to be hyper loud and buzzing and confusing, on top of all of the apathy that people have adopted over just being constantly pushed into the dirt At least they feel so. They feel as such. You always make the argument that things are not nearly as bad now as they have been in the past, but people still feel as if they're
The
suffering.
suffering is relative to the individual.
Right. So, like, there's an objective suffering, but there's
Yeah.
also a relative suffering, and sometimes our relative experience of life is all that we know, right?
If me walking to the store in the cold to somebody in Antarctica walking to their to their house, which
Right.
is in the freezing cold, is going to be a radically different experience. Even though it's colder over there, I'm going to experience it as more of a hardship.
Exactly. And no one can tell you otherwise. Like, as far as you know in your actual reality, that is one of the worst sufferings that you've ever had to go through up to that point.
Right.
And so constantly being bombarded by all of this at once without having any path that's clear, discernible, critical thinking meta system to allow us to escape and truly integrate all of these crazy differences in the world. We are just led, sort of like chattel that are yoked to this natural process, this Darwinian process,
Right.
in which all of it's so much bigger than us, and we're so blind to it.
Right. Well, we never stop to ask why we do these things.
Right.
You know, like I have a weird memory from being in preschool where they gave us all note cards, you know, like note cards with the lines going through so you can write on them.
Like index cards.
Yeah. And what they had us do is they just had us scissor across the lines, all of them, until there was like, they were all broken up into lines with no end goal. Like you didn't do anything with them afterwards. It was just like cut on the line. And I remember one time, because I didn't...
Single file, man.
Yeah, it was exactly like that. And I remember one time I just cut the note card up and she yelled at me.
Yeah.
Like it really mattered that I cut that note card up when I was 5 years old.
It's like just forcing everyone to write and do everything with their right hand.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's
Like,
another good example.
schools did that for a long time. Like,
Yeah.
why be so uniform about everything that we remove people's autonomy to write with whatever hand they wish?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I even remember like having like using words kind of like invariably to be like, you know, add some spice to my writing on like, you know, tests and stuff. And they would mark it as wrong. And then I later, you know, as I developed my writing skills, I realized that's not wrong. You can do that. Like
Yeah.
words are malleable in that sense where you can kind of be loose with the
Sure.
with the syntax and the context a little bit.
I just thought of something as a quick segue that I never have thought of before. The whole like making people write with their right hands. We also within the actual structure of our technology, we at one point in history developed technologies such that our right hands were dominant. It's like when you drive a car in America specifically, the stick shift, the gear shifter would be on your right side. So it's like, it's almost as if in order to ensure that everyone can operate their right arm efficiently such that they can drive their manual stick shift and not kill people on the road, they inculcate
Well, in other
using-
countries, it's on the other side, though.
Yeah, exactly. But it's
Yeah.
just like a weird, maybe there are small like archetypal weirdnesses like that all throughout society that I've never thought about before. It was a fun thought.
Yeah, like how much does that influence us? The fact that we just
Yeah.
like are forced to use our right hand.
Exactly.
Chicken
or the egg.
it almost makes you wonder like, could there be some group of people who knew that like, oh, right-handed people are less more docile, less
Right.
likely to rebel? Like,
Or
doubtful,
is
but-
it just like an unconscious meme
Yeah.
that's in our gene pool, that's in our like epigenetic gene pool that makes us to be a certain way and to want to shape people to be certain ways in uniform, like single file
There's
line.
some evolutionary biologists right now just freaking out because we're not giving the...
We're not hitting it on the
Yeah,
head.
we're just not hitting it. but,
Maybe.
yeah.
But to talk about genetics and epigenetics, that brings me to the last little piece of this puzzle that gets me going all the time about why I feel like revolution may or may not be actually plausible. And it's the nature of globalization. It's the fact that we are so divided, as we said, plus globalizing at a rate that has never occurred
Sure.
before in history. So we're uber tribalized right now.
Right.
Uber polar. But our technology has advanced us forward in such a way that we actually are getting to a point where globalization
You should
is a
define
reality.
globalization.
Yeah, so globalization, for anyone that doesn't really know, it's like the socio-economical event that is occurring in which corporations and cultures are being lost as corporations are being erected and then finding their way all the way across the globe from one end to the other of the whole planet towards an end in which the whole world can trade with the whole world. Everybody can kind of see everybody.
Right.
It's like one family on the earth.
Yes. By the way, I think that there's a beautiful novelty of breaking down the barriers that are borders in
Right.
order to, get some light shed upon things that you might otherwise have not been exposed to if you didn't know what some, kid in China tweeted yesterday.
Right.
You know, that maybe it actually changed your whole worldview on things. Like, there is a beauty in that, but it also comes with a danger. And I think that
there's a price.
right. And it's funny because I think this is a truism. It's like an archetype. I think a lot of the times that we implement solutions, it actually exacerbates the problem. And so you'd think, oh, globalization, that will make us less tribal because we're
Right.
all part of like this, but it actually does the exact opposite.
That's Ken Wilber's whole philosophy of integralism, like integral life.
Mm-hmm.
It's about looking at those worldviews that we talked about in brief from Jean Gebser, seeing the differences, looking at all of the religious orders, all of the political factions, seeing truth that exists a little bit within each of them, like a sliver of truth in every single one of them, and finding ways to piece them all together, right? So we can achieve a state of transcendence towards globalization, because eventually we not only will be globalized, but we'll move to like an interstellar sort of worldview, not just to where, like science fiction, we go up to the moon and make a moon base and then leave for other planets, but the way that we literally view ourselves as individuals is holistic towards, I'm a creature of this planet and so are you. I'm a creature of this galaxy and so are you, rather than being so like tribally oriented.
Right. I understand why people are weary of the idea of caring about somebody more because they're arbitrarily born on the same plot of land.
Right.
Right. But just we have to look and extrapolate the pragmatic utility that we've seen throughout history, is that it's good to, it's beneficial to do that. The same way that you do that with your family. Like if it was, if the question was between saving your family or saving a group of people that you've never met, you're going to save your family because
I think
we're built to do that.
Yeah, I think there's literal genetic, like Darwinian evolutionary factors in play there about family bonds.
Well, there's also the social pragmatic utility that, like, if I save my family, I know my family's gonna
always save you.
Always save me.
But that's also like nationalism. It's like if I save my brothers under this flag, then they'll get my back too.
Right.
Or if I save my fellow human from this alien, then my fellow human will get my back from this alien. Like, we're always looking for this this devil character or archetype to fight against together, right? But
more people kill themselves in times of peace than in times of war because we're always looking for an enemy. And so when there's no external enemy, the enemy is internal.
Right. But to move a little bit larger than just the family unit, to go to more like a cultural or you mentioned being born on the same plot of land, so almost like national sort of tribalism. There's the utility out of that was exactly that, like, I protect you, you protect me.
Exactly.
And it makes it easier for me to get goods, because if I can trust you and you live down the street for me, then on a day-to-day I can get fed and I can get the things that I need to make sure I survive and I'm happily living. But the guy 3 towns over, who maybe I see like once every couple of years as they pass through, I don't really know that guy, so I don't really care about him that much. So if he becomes an enemy or not, whatever, I'll kill him.
Right.
And that's kind of how nations and warring factions, tribes fight against each other. This globalization concept brings us to that level in which the guy across the globe is exactly like the guy that's sitting right next to me. Because the advent of the internet, the information age that we live in, high tech, transportation, all of it, the infrastructure of trade has become so large and so technologically advanced that we can get across the globe in less than a day.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So the playing, the sandbox has shrunk. So we get to see each other. But that also has its own limitations. It has its own downfalls. There's a few things. The internet.
Is it that the sandbox has shrunk, or is it that we took a multitude of sandboxes and put them all together?
That's kind of what happened.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about the benefits of globalization, right? We can see everyone else easily. I can pop up a Zoom call and call someone that is in Ireland right now. Shout outs to Uber Boyo. Hopefully we'll have him on the show soon. It brings the world together in that way. We can trade with anyone. I can get goods from anywhere. I can eat cuisine from anywhere. And it's sort of like blending cultures together in one aspect. But there's so much more that is also negative towards globalization, which is giant corporations, globalized corporate. Basically, there's this concept called the corporatocracy, in which global corporations who have more wealth than the nations that house their business.
And they do.
actually control more of the events that are unfolding than one could ever imagine, because the mighty dollar, the currency, is so important to everyone in this weird supreme Western civilization that we have. And competition is so high, and just like increasing profit seems to be the number one reasoning for any business, for most businesses to exist.
For good reason. I mean, it's brought more people out of poverty in 15 years than in all of human history combined.
Sure, and there's lots of thinkers out there who will argue that till the ends of the earth.
Yeah.
But
not saying that it doesn't come with its pitfalls.
right, it's like we always talk about in the nature of integral philosophy, the higher that you climb to heaven, the deeper of a hole that you dig towards hell, because there's always this balance between the poles.
Right.
This global corporatocratic empire basically has usurped in a lot of ways the actual fundamental sovereignty of much of these individual nations and countries. And it's not very easy to talk about because it is so complicated. But truly, if we're going to overgeneralize and oversummarize, imagine like the top 50 richest companies on the planet, and in the nature of how they got to be the richest is because they expanded their empires the furthest. They did the most business with the most people, interested the most people, as well as gave prices to the most people, so they just got as big as they did.
Right.
Now they're all over the whole world. They have multiple chains and locations.
They're compelling.
Yeah, they're all over the globe, though, in almost every country. And if they're not in a country because it's underdeveloped or whatever, they have interest in that country to get their resources or whatever. So then they have stake in that country, and so they're doing things in that country, whether or not it's blatantly obvious or they're paying people to go do things under the table or above it. These corporations are everywhere, and they're influencing the culture of people everywhere. So it's not just about them like controlling the shots or whatever. It's literally about pushing out the individual culture in the places that they go to lay their roots and grow their giant oak tree, or like it's like giant weeds. You know what I mean? It's like when a Walmart comes into your local city, into your little town, and you've got like your mom and pop food mart over there and your tire shop over there and like your clothes store over there. All of a sudden, all those places start going out of business because everyone takes their business to Walmart because it has this giant icon behind it, this giant weight behind it. Everyone knows what it is. Even if you love your mom and pop store and the owners of that store so much, and you've known them your whole life, there's still a part of us that is controlled by this mimetic magic to where we'll just be drawn to the gravity of that Walmart because of the prices. The prices are better. They have more to choose from. Our novelty button gets hit. Our dopamine receptors fly off the handles, and then we just go there and they go out of business. And that happens globally and in more ways than you could even think of.
And it's happened more in the pandemic than any other time in human history. So many mom and pop shops have gone out of businesses, and all CEOs of major corporations have done is gotten infinitely wealthier.
Yeah,
So.
and especially with the advent of something like COVID.
Sure.
It's like, it's not even about pushing businesses out, really. It's not even about bringing in business that will competitively destroy them, kind of like how Netflix destroyed like Blockbuster.
Well, yeah, it's just
and
that they
Hollywood
built
Video.
a better infrastructure so that when COVID happened, they already had the systems in place so that people could take advantage of them.
That as well. So yes, like they disrupted the market in that way with their innovation, but there is legislation happening all over the place that's forcing small
Yes,
businesses to
true.
be damaged. There's stimulus packages that are being given, money that's being paid to these individual business owners, loans being given out.
Right.
But then in order for the interest to be paid back, or in order for them to skip interest, or for the loans to be forgiven, or whatever, what have you, even for them to even be approved for the loan sometimes, they have to be subservient to certain aspects of this governmental force that's giving them this money. Right. So then it's like, okay, they can take control and subvert a little bit of this private ownership in X, Y, Z, A, B, and C, and all these other ways, such that these small businesses are actually being pushed out. And it's becoming harder and harder and harder. And even more so than that, it's just all of the wealth is flowing to these giant corporations. I think there was a statistic that said Amazon's stock went up and their actual net worth almost doubled in 2020.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
It is.
When everyone's hurting for work, or it seems so, at least, mediatized reality will say that in the consensus. nobody's making enough money and small businesses are closing. Nobody's going out and spending their money in the world, but they're all paying it to Amazon to buy stuff to come to their home because they're afraid of this virus, right? The whole point is that these corporations, in one way or another, are becoming extremely large. And not only that, but they're globalizing and they're shaping and manipulating the culture and the areas all over the globe. So everything is homogenizing. Everything is becoming uniform. Everything is losing its identity as a unique, soulful thing, manifestation. Everything is falling subservient to these corporations. And whether or not there is this global corporate conspiracy.
Well, the Pareto distribution is also something to consider, the way that money distributes itself in any given society. Even indigenous societies, it's always the top, the people with the most amount of resources are always in a specific manner disproportionate to the people with the
there's like a gravity, right? And then there's like the bottom feeders and the trickle offs.
Yeah, but Tucker Carlson did write a good book about how it's exacerbating further and further.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at now. It's unprecedented in history towards a degree. Like, of course, those archetypes exist, the Prado distribution, all of it. Like, it's all going to be there, right? We're all going to have problems, even though we have goodnesses, heaven, hell, all the stuff. But for the first time, we are seeing things that we've never seen before, that we're not prepared for, culturally, genetically, mentally, like historically, morally, psychologically. We're just not ready for a lot of the things that are occurring. And this globalization, whether or not people realize it, is leading to some heavy, heavy, heavy effects on the environment, on even our genetic makeup. Whether or not there's people out there who are evil, who are trying to manipulate our actual physiological structure, GMOs are a thing. Right. Because they got to feed enough people. They got to feed as many people as possible.
Double-edged sword. Right? A lot of these things are just double-edged swords.
There's a ton of waste that's happening because we have to use all the water to raise grain to feed the cows.
Right. The story that I always use is like if you were an impoverished town and your people were starving, maybe your food source recently got cut off and you knew your whole village was doomed, and someone came to you and said, "Hey, well, I could build this factory here. It'll give all your people jobs. They'll be able to sustain themselves, but the air quality around here is going to be awful." Right. You'd probably take that bargain because your survival is really contingent upon it.
Right. And there are these conscious and unconscious things that are happening right now in the world in which, like, deep ecology is so important to study because we're damaging the environment. We're damaging our cultures. We're damaging our children. We're damaging our bodies. We're irradiating ourselves. There's all these crazy things all around us that we're not used to. So many things are occurring, right? And in the globalization scheme of all things, we don't realize necessarily sometimes, like 1984, whether or not there is a conglomerate system of people trying to pull strings. There is a corporatocracy that is controlled by private interests that has more power than the sovereign governments that house them. And so when we're all like stuck on this circus and bread bait and switch maneuver, fighting about who is on what side of the tribe and whose line on the tug of war game is stronger, we don't even realize that, like, the problem is over there. The problem's like not right here. And it's not over there with those people. It's like transcendent. Right. It's another level. It's like a hyper real.
Right.
To shout
out
the
invisible strings that you can't assess or comprehensively analyze because it's beyond comprehension. The intricacies are beyond what our prefrontal cortex has the capacity to render.
It's at least beyond the ability to reduce it into simple terms.
Right.
You have to look at systems and how systems are interacting with other systems. And it takes a huge amount of effort, tremendous effort, and study and careful observation.
And even then, all you can kind of do is put them in containers and representations to best describe them.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Baudrillard being lost in the simulation because we're stuck on simulation. We're stuck on representation. We can't interface with the real thing all the time. And so we get lost in these games that we play. But the whole reason why I bring up globalization or all of this is not necessarily to like fearmonger or whatever. It's just to recognize that truth, as well as to ask the question again one more time in this new context: is revolution even possible? Is it possible? Is it possible to consciously have a revolution? And what does that mean? You know what I mean?
And even if it is, I think we have to ask ourselves the kind of cliche question of not whether we could, but whether we should.
Well, whether we could is a good question.
Right. Because
whether we could on all those spectrums that we just talked about, but even like in our own backyard, if we were talking about a tyrannical government that we had to go fight against and become terrorists because we have political agendas for why we're pushing back on the man.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Second Amendment, everyone wants to spout off how the Second Amendment was meant for us to protect ourselves from tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like now, with this crazy technologically advanced culture that we live in, having these little pew pew guns don't even matter.
Guerrilla
anymore.
warfare always wins.
I mean, like,
They're not going to... Governments aren't really in the business of
Destroying
nuking their
everything.
own people because then you have nobody to govern.
Right. That's like Sun Tzu, Art of War 101, right? Like, don't total the whole... Don't turn everything into a wasteland because then what's the point?
Right.
Like, you don't have
Because then
anything.
you have nothing to rule over and now you're equal with everybody else.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why, back to the very beginning of this talk, Christianity, the Romans Romanizing everything and how it all happened, that's just another archetypal motif that's happening all the way across history for all of eternity.
Right.
So yeah, maybe there's a slightly mimetic safe proof there that we can rest assured in that we're not going to just nuke ourselves into oblivion.
No.
Hopefully. But
nukes are actually a great way to prevent nukes from going off.
Yeah.
Because if I have a nuke and you have a nuke, or maybe you have several nukes and I have several nukes, it's actually a good insurance policy. We don't want to go there, so we're actually less likely to go to war.
Well, it's kind of like the whole idea of why I espouse the Second Amendment's awesome. Everyone should carry a gun. Mm-hmm. If everyone and their mom had a gun out in public,
if you want one,
it would be difficult for a shooter to justify pulling a gun out in the middle of public and firing because although he may create chaos, he's probably going to get shot down extremely quickly.
Yeah, that
is
true. In places where there's more regulations on guns, there's more school shootings.
Yeah,
more,
exactly.
More mass shootings in general.
But not to get too deep into that, it's just like what you're saying, if you're on equal playing field, then there's less likelihood that the actual event will occur because nobody really wants to take themselves down in a kamikaze attack.
Right.
Usually.
Usually.
There are radicals out there all the time. But do we even have a level playing field anymore? We don't even know some of the technologies that the military industrial complex has access to.
Sure.
Not only our own military, but governmental militaries in the whole global scheme of things. There are private industries out there whose technologies are way more advanced than even militant governments.
Right.
Because governments are usually socialized.
Mm-hmm.
Private interests can do whatever the hell they want
and
to.
they can profit a lot off of it.
And so they do crazy stuff, and they
Mm-hmm.
do push the envelopes, and they do illegal things under lock and key.
Right.
The government does too, but there's all these warring factions out there.
Yeah, but I think there's a reason why most governments don't generally attack their own people. Most.
Yeah, most of them, at least.
At least the ones that we consider to be
But
in the conversation in a reasonable fashion.
That's the exact question, though. We're not fighting. We're not bleeding on the streets anymore. But there is a war going on.
Yeah.
Constantly every day to control you, to control your thoughts, to control how you feel about the world. I have the documents. I know the people. I got people. Pedophiles. Aliens. Ask me. Pull it up. Pull it up.
Pull it up. Pull it up.
Pull it up right now. Look.
Jamie,
pull it up.
Okay.
It's the truth, man.
It is.
There's a lot going on out there. I don't know if revolution can even happen. And there's also people out there who don't want revolution. They want change, but they want giver-based cultures. They want needs-based societies. They don't want domination. They don't want masculine energy. They want to balance it back out with these feminine archetypes.
Sure. Which is fine. I mean, to a degree.
Compounds out there where people are giving and receiving, and there's no more money, and there's... I guess the point that I'm saying right now is I don't know if true revolution is possible because of the sheer complexity of things, as well as the limited scope in which an individual can understand anything about the world.
And I think that complexity is so overwhelming that it creates a sense of fear in the average individual. And that's kind of the reason why you have a government in the first place, is because they promise you all these things. We're going to protect you. We're going to keep war off your soil. We're going to make sure that nobody infringes upon your rights. And when there's so many new things going on and so much uncertainty, that kind of sounds like a good bargain.
It does. And it's almost like the emergent process, the emergent evolutionary process of things becoming more complex from simple, and then emerging into these weirdnesses that we can't really look at directly. It's almost like technology is moving us there, right? Like Elon Musk and his weirdness that everyone thinks is like the mark of the beast or the Antichrist or whatever.
Yeah.
Or AI, artificial intelligence, automation, the hive mind society that Alex Jones always rants off about, how Google and all of these hyper tech companies are trying to create an artificial intelligence that we all jack up into through neural linking, and we become sort of like homogenized,
They're like psychically connected to us.
psychically connected individuals who lose our identities in sort of these hyper real upper level
Which
like
they're getting good at it already. I mean,
demons, kind of.
we see manifestations of that with like targeted advertisements. It's not even something that's under wraps anymore. Like
Right.
there once
It's
was
right
a
in front of
time
you.
where corporations really fought to the tooth and nail to say, no, we're not stealing your data.
Yeah.
We're not selling your data at that. Yet now it's like anybody you talk to will say, oh yeah, the other week I was talking about computers, and all of a sudden computers are being advertised to me on Amazon, and we
Right.
kind of just scoff it off like it's no big deal. But
And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. There's like this magic, right? Occultism 101, one of the first tenets of real magic, like Renaissance era ceremonial magic, is if you want to hide something, hide it in plain sight.
right.
I don't know if that was Crowley or someone else who said that first, Eliphas Levi or
Aleister
someone
Crowley,
else. But if you want to hide something, hide it in plain sight. If you want to tell someone a lie, tell them a half truth. Double think, double speak. 1984, Newspeak. And there's so much information out there. It's all confusing. So sometimes it's like, yes, maybe we should just be subservient to the process. We should just give in to this process because people are holons and are emerging into groups, which emerge into governments, which emerge into nations. And if we look at nations as individual people, those nations are forming one person above the globe. And that global human being, which is this new AI construct, potentially can lead us out of the darkness and into the new age of transcendentalism, like true transcendence.
You think uncertainty is a precursor to transcendence? It's kind of what it sounds like. I'm extrapolating.
A bit. It's more like how everything has two sides of the same coin, right? There's always a positive and a negative.
Sure.
And we're always talking about integral philosophy.
Yep.
Integral philosophy. I think there's a potential negative in which integral philosophy, if everyone in the world agreed upon it, would lead us to a place in which we lose our identities in a unified, homogeneous soup of unification through uniformity. And it's like, that's the negative side of it. Like, we do synchronize, we do integrate, but we lose ourselves in it. We truly give ourselves to it like it's our savior, like it's an ideal thing that we should just like bow down to and not question because it's all around us and there's nothing we can do about it. But there's a positive side of maintaining cultural identities in the world and not just like removing all the borders and making everyone love children together where everyone fucks everyone and the babies that are born are just like love children that everyone will love. And we maintain our identities and we maintain our divisions, but we integrate those properly such that we actually we can truly unify while being sovereign. That is the positive side of it. But I fear oftentimes that when AI comes and Neuralink comes and we all jack into it, that we'll lose ourselves. Sort of like this new emergent pattern will truly be akin to a demon. I know you read the Screwtape Letters recently, and C.S.
All
Lewis.
the intricate ways that like these archons are trying to manipulate human beings, like oh, this one is like the student is like, oh, the England is going to war, what a great thing. And Screwtape is like, well, no, that's actually not a great thing. When a man goes to war, he knows he might die. We would rather people die in nursing homes when they least expect it. Right.
There's all these weird ways that they just like sneakily just get up in there and covertly make you lose your soul and go to hell.
Right.
It's kind of like the nature of the book. It's written by a Christian apologist, C.S. Lewis. For anyone listening who hasn't read it, it's great fiction, but I bring it up exactly sort of like that. It's just the demons consume. In that book, the demons who are talking amongst each other through the form of letters and envelope correspondence, however that's happening in hyperspace or whatever, they're talking about how to sneakily steal people's souls. They distinguish God, the greatest God, the highest level, the goodness, the good, the beautiful, and the true, from their father, who you can only assume is Satan. They never really use the term, but God wants everyone to come to God's self through their own individual free will. And God wants everyone to sacrifice all that they have for God and God's will and God's divine grace and goodness, knowing that that is the right move to make, but they've been given the will to do otherwise. And if they come to God and and just like truly conjoin with God and lose their identity in God by giving everything up, truly everything, including their identity, God will give it all back plus more
Right.
in heaven. Like, not about like after death. It's not about, oh, die, then we'll give this to you. It's just, if you do this thing with true faith and you make the sacrifice, then it will all be given back to you, because that's the nature of graciousness. Plus more, plus interest. The demon wants to just consume you. Satan wants to just like pull you in and eat your soul and conjoin you to his flesh. Like, part of your soul becomes his arm now. And it's like he's got millions of people's souls that build his whole body, and you just writhe in anguish and agony because you're just left bereft of a soul. You're just conjoined with this giant soupy creature from the depths, and something of like the Evil Dead or something.
Right.
And that really painted a vivid picture in my mind in his book, because it almost feels to me like the two sides of the coin of unity and uniformity. It's the two sides of the coin of like maintaining sovereign individuality while we
coming to God through free will, or assimilating with this fleshy
demon,
creature,
with like losing your identity, losing your autonomy, losing your agency, such that you get to continue to exist. That's all you are, is an existence. You're a husk. You're like a shell of what you were. You are there, but like cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, energetically, you're dead. You're not you anymore. You have been swallowed and turned into this other thing. It's like when you eat food, that food is no longer that food after your body like processes it and ingests it and then gives the nutrients to yourself. You have essentially alchemically converted that food into you. You've now added it to you. Satan and evil in C.S. Lewis's book is essentially that. God is essentially like, I don't know, the Power Rangers. Each Power Ranger is still a Power Ranger sitting in their own mech, and all those mechs come together to form a super mech that wins the day.
Right.
But they're all their own people in their own mechs, but it's all happening perfectly together in unison and synchronicity to lead towards a betterment, to lead towards that ascended goal. And so like that's the two sides of the coin of integral philosophy that I'm always thinking about when I'm promulgating this idea on this channel.
And just to reiterate, that's kind of what it seems like we're seeing right now. We're tiptoeing that line with what's going on with this.
Yeah.
These.
It's always a tug of war.
Right.
Tug of war. Man, so I just went on like a spiel.
Well, we talked about a wide array of topics, and I think we eventually ran into one where you were just like, you ran with it.
Well, it's the union of opposites again.
Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it.
I always am trying to just drive that point home in different ways, you know. All of the great philosophies and wisdoms, schools, and ancient cultures, they're all talking about this concept, you know. So it's just so important to me. And thanks everybody for sticking it out. This has been a fun conversation for me. We wanted to talk more about revolution. We did a lot. Not in the way that most might expect when they read the name of this episode.
Sure.
But the revolution will not be televised does make sense. Or maybe it will be televised, just like we said, because there's so much going on. Nobody gives a fuck if it's out there anymore. The last thing that I will say on that is I always think of the interaction between these like demons and angels, right? Or even in a mythological sense, like the gods above, you know, when you read like the Odyssey or whatever, any of those old texts, the gods, whether or not they could or could not interfere with the people on earth, there's always some interplay. Like whether or not gods could come directly down into earth and manipulate events, whether or not they had to stay above in the clouds and just like sort of manipulate stuff, but kind of just like watch it all happen and have fun, like watching television. I always think of the world in these terms, between like good and evil fighting against each other. And I always think, and this is just me, it's like God or goodness says to the demon, you can do whatever you want on earth. Because even in the Bible, even God kind of gives Satan autonomy over the world, right? Like the Bible states that earth is basically Satan's kingdom, right? And God's like, you can do whatever you want on earth with one rule. And the rule is you have to tell the truth. And if you tell the truth and no one listens, you have not broken the rules, so I won't come down and stop you.
Or if you tell the truth in such a way that everybody acquiesces to that truth because it's a half-truth or a manipulative truth, that's within the realm of
Also
the rules.
within the realm.
Yeah.
So through an Orwellian doublespeak, or through just putting the truth out there, but then burying it with all this other crap.
Right. The best example that people use is to say that, like, you know, if I convince you that you're getting a fair bargain by having you work for me for 40 hours a week and I give you this paycheck, you're not actually a slave.
Right.
You've agreed to it.
And then so there's giant philosophical questions that we can unpack. Maybe we should do that in another episode soon, because it's all about moral responsibility. You know, again, almost back to the lies episode that we've done. It's sort of like, okay, well, you're lying, but you're not lying, and you're doing this and you're manipulating people, and you're kind of going down these rabbit holes. So we could unpack that more, especially on a lying on we did on our lies episode. So check that out. We'll link that in the description. But it's always a fun thought of mine to think about, truly.
Definitely.
And it's not like if they fictionalize the truth.
Right.
Right? If that is what the demon does. It's like, oh, I told you the truth, but I made you think it was fiction through X, Y, and Z without actually telling you that, then it's not my fault that you didn't believe it. So it reminds me of, like, the conspiracy theory of the cabal that is Hollywood. Like all the vampire pedophiles.
Yeah. I have the documents. They're upstairs.
Reptilians. Oh, no, wait. That's other people, Jay-Z Knight.
And
then Archons is David Icke and all these
David
people.
Icke, yeah.
David Icke's the reptile Archons.
He's the archive, or the...
Archons.
I think he's the reptile guy. Reptilian
Yeah, the
guy.
reptilian art. Yeah,
Same thing. One and the same.
Same stuff. Yeah, all the stuff. But I always think about it, and the reason why I'm talking about it right now is because it makes me think the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that old cliche. We want revolution. We want something better than what we have right now. We want to see change in the world. We want to be better. We want transcendence. You and I want integration and integral philosophy to be a thing. But even when we are looking directly at the truth can deceive us. That's something I always have to remember.
Absolutely.
Like, our perception of the truth is always limited, such that even if we're staring at it in the face, we might be actually looking at a devil. And Satan in the Bible was one of the most beautiful angels.
Right.
So it's always just something to keep in mind. It's that balance again, right? The integration of the balance. Stare deep enough into the abyss, it's going to stare back at you. Type cliche, but I'm saying a lot of different things all at once right now. Might not be making sense. Don't really know where I'm going with it, other than I try to discern the best things for myself and the people around me in my life. Try to take right action. Just give yourself some grace. I give myself grace. Because oftentimes, even when you're doing the best thing, like, sometimes you're not. And that is why, again, and I'll wrap it up with this, I ask the question, can we actually see a real revolution given everything that we've talked about? I don't know.
Let us know in the comments, though, whether you think it's possible or not.
Maybe some people think that there's nothing to even revolt against.
And if that's the case, you should also let us know in the comments.
Nihilism 101. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening. If you made it this far, as always, we love you. Thank you so very much. We appreciate you. If you'd like to monetarily donate to this cause, please see the link in our description and find your way to our Patreon. We'd greatly appreciate any donation at all. Nothing is fine.
But coffee, just a coffee a month.
Yeah. 1 cup of coffee, the equivalent of that a month, will help us so much in obtaining equipment, paying for subscriptions to be able to produce this type of content for you. And we have a lot planned, a lot on the way. So anything helps. And again, if not, that's totally cool. We're glad that you're here. Thanks for joining us and continuing the great conversation.